When Wilfred Shearman cornered me with his group, I was in the middle of sending a WhatsApp message to my pinned contact Freddie Darling. "I've got something on tonight, so I'll be a bit late for our game." The dim streetlight cast a small pool of light at the corner. As I sent the message, I clenched my fist. When I looked up, I heard a notification sound. Through the gaps in the crowd, I saw Wilfred leaning against the wall, his eyes fixed on his phone. The coldness in his expression melted away, replaced by a gentle smile. He brought the phone closer to his mouth and said in a low, gentle voice, "No worries, babe. I've got some business to take care of as well. Just message me when you're free." The people in front of me fell silent. My phone vibrated once in my hand. I glanced down to see a voice message from Freddie Darling. "You're lucky. Apologize." Wilfred put away his phone, his gaze turning cold and emotionless as he looked at me. "Say it and you can go." "Will?" The woman beside him called out, dissatisfied. Wilfred ignored her, pulling out a cigarette. Someone offered him a light, but he didn't take it. The features of the man before me matched the photos I'd seen before. Wilfred stood at the edge of the group, the light illuminating only half his face. The contrast between light and shadow couldn't diminish his striking good looks. I shook my head. "Fine," Wilfred said flatly, no longer looking at me. He exchanged a glance with one of his men. Fists and kicks rained down on me. One after another, each point of contact bringing searing pain. Threats and insults pierced my ears. Eloan Crowley's gleeful laughter rang out. I don't know how long it lasted. When I opened my eyes again, the figures at the corner had vanished. I provoked Eloan Crowley. She's been a nuisance for quite some time now, throwing her weight around at school just because she's dating some roughneck. On Wednesday, I was queuing for lunch in the canteen. She suddenly appeared with her mates, cutting in line right in front of me without so much as a "by your leave." On any other day, I might have said something to her first. But I was famished that day. I'd forgotten breakfast and was starving by third period. So I just shoved her. But I'd forgotten how strong I am. That push sent her sprawling on her backside. I reckoned she'd never been treated like that before. Her face turned scarlet, like an overinflated red balloon about to burst. I was about to apologize when I heard the dinner lady call out, "What'll it be, love?" "Don't dilly-dally, there's a queue behind you." I hesitated, momentarily forgetting about Eloan still on the floor, and rattled off my order to the dinner lady. By the time I'd got my food, she'd vanished. I thought about it and decided she was in the wrong to begin with, so we were even. That's just how I feel about it. Eloan Crowley clearly doesn't see it that way. Otherwise, she wouldn't have asked her boyfriend's best mate to teach me a lesson. And I wouldn't have been beaten up by my own boyfriend and his mates. As I returned to my dorm room, my clothes were soaked in dirty water, filthy and smelly. My roommate covered her nose, her face filled with surprise. "Poppy, what happened to you?" "I accidentally fell on the way back," I replied. She sighed in relief. "Go take a shower quickly." I nodded, removing the face mask from my face. The mobile in my pocket vibrated again. "What are you up to, babe? Are you done yet? Why aren't you replying?" "Babe?" I didn't respond. Instead, I pressed the power button to turn off the screen and entered the bathroom. I've been in an online relationship with Wilfred Shearman for 3 years, and we've never met in person. When we first got to know each other, he called me Poppy. As we grew closer, he started calling me Pops. Later, when he confessed his feelings, he began calling me Babe. We've known each other for nearly 3 years now. During this time, his grandfather passed away. For a while, we had 5 phone calls every day. He would talk about his grandfather, his voice growing hoarse, or sometimes breaking into tears. I would cry with him on the other end, comforting him through my own tears. I know every detail of his childhood. I've listened to him reminisce about those bygone days of youth, the only time he truly longs for. Eventually, Wilfred began to heal. Time proved that the best comfort is indeed companionship. Even though we've never met face to face. "Whenever he needs me, I'm there." He once said, "Babe, I'm so glad you're here." When I received this message, my best friend Imogen happened to be beside me and saw it. She scoffed. I didn't realize you were so free, comforting a complete stranger through a screen. I kept my eyes on the screen, answering indirectly. It's quite amazing, isn't it? I looked at Imogen with a smile. Is this the greatness of love? The sound of running water in the bathroom suddenly stopped. I wrapped myself in a towel and came out to find my roommate pointing at the mobile phone on the table. Poppy, your boyfriend called a few times. I told him you were in the shower, she said. Thanks, I replied softly. Her gaze fell on my arm, and she exclaimed again, how did you get that bruise? It looks quite bad. I've got some cream, come here and let me rub some on for you. As the pain spread from the bruise, I bit my lip to keep from making a sound. The pungent smell of the medicinal cream filled our small room as I typed a message back to Wilfred on WhatsApp. I'm out of the shower now. My eyes flickered, and I continued typing. I ran into someone queue jumping today, so I gave them a push. They said they'd get someone to teach me a lesson. The typing indicator on the other end bounced a few times before changing to on a call. Voice message notifications kept popping up, but I didn't play them. I just replied. It's fine, they didn't come after me. They jumped the queue and still have the nerve to complain? Wilfred asked. More voice messages kept appearing from him, long and short, with red dots. But my eyes were fixed on that one text reply, and I couldn't help but laugh out loud. What's so funny? My roommate asked, puzzled. Wiping away the tears of laughter from the corners of my eyes, I said, just saw a funny joke. Our chats never ceased, not even for a day. Wilfred had sent me many photos. There were stunning sunsets at dusk, clusters of unknown little flowers by the grass, and skies so blue they seemed pure. And there was one of him standing in his garden, smiling at the camera. The hem of his white shirt caught in the breeze, the young man stood tall and elegant, like a Greek statue come to life, his smile as warm and inviting as the moon's embrace. He said, "Babe, this photo was taken especially for you. Who knows, maybe one day you'll recognize me on the street." I said there's no such coincidence in this world. Now I realize I was wrong. There are even more incredible coincidences in this world. His face, half illuminated by the night lights, was exquisite yet cold. Those beautiful features overlapped with the ones in the photo. Familiar, yet strange. Wilfred once asked me what kind of person I liked. I asked him in return, "What are you like?" He said, "Whatever you like, that's what I am." I said, "I like a young man as bright and clear as the moon after rain." The Wilfred I imagined was just like that. He fell silent for a long while, then only replied with a smiley face. The chat window on the screen kept popping up with new messages. I stared blankly for a good half-minute before finally sending him a message. Wilfred Shearman. Do you want to meet up? The next day in the cafeteria, I ran into Aloan Crowley again. She continued to take shortcuts, while I stood in the middle of another queue, watching the lad who got cut in line swallow his pride and say nothing. Aloan turned to chat and laugh with her girlfriends, her blood-red lips curling upwards as she caught sight of me in the queue from the corner of her eye. Something seemed to occur to her, and her smirk grew wider as she pulled her friends out of line and squeezed directly between me and the person in front. With a shrug of her elbow, she nearly knocked me backwards into the person behind. I stumbled, barely managing to keep my balance. The person in front turned around, their eyes filled with disdain, as if mocking my foolishness from yesterday. I rarely saw such an ugly side to people. My lip was nearly bitten bloody as I desperately tried to suppress the turmoil within, lowering my gaze to conceal all emotion. The WhatsApp chat with my darling Wilfred was still open on the screen, showing the kiss emoji he had sent me yesterday. Really, babe? We're finally going to meet. The conversation ended there. I finished getting my food and sat down in the cafeteria, scrolling back and forth through the short exchange. It was as if I was trying to discern something more from those few lines, but nothing new revealed itself. Aloan Crowley thought she had one. Wilfred Shearman hadn't come to see me since that night. Life seemed to have returned to normal. But beneath the calm surface, a restless whirlpool was lurking. I couldn't swallow this bitter pill. Monday evening, elective class. As the bell rang, a smartly dressed middle-aged woman took out the register and began calling names. I sat in my seat, listening to the string of names while texting Wilfred on WhatsApp. "Babe, when exactly is it? I can't wait anymore, I want to see you so badly." I replied with an emoji just as the teacher called my name. Poppy Rathbone. I answered here and raised my hand. The teacher's gaze flashed across my face before she looked down to mark the register. No rush. The roll call continued, and I accurately caught that familiar name, turning my head to look, only to see a face that didn't match the name. The girl raised her hand and softly answered here. The teacher looked at her and nodded. My heart suddenly began to race, feeling like anticipation mixed with warning. Miss! An abrupt voice suddenly rang out in the classroom. The middle-aged woman's piercing gaze shot directly at me. I stood up, a docile smile on my lips, and respectfully dropped a bombshell. That's not Eloan Crowley. My gaze fell on the girl's somewhat flustered face as I continued without changing my expression. She must be a substitute. The classroom fell silent. I knew it. The conflict between Eloan and me was about to escalate. Perhaps other teachers wouldn't care about substitute lessons. But I knew this teacher would follow up. Not just follow up. I reckoned Eloan Crowley's chances of passing this course were slim. In the evening, back in my dorm, Wilfred Sherman's voice call came through. His voice was low and husky, filled with a tenderness that could drown one in affection. How was your day, babe? When he called me darling, the words seemed to have rolled in sugar, falling into my ears with a tingling sweetness that could make one blush. Today was lovely, I replied with a smile, my voice carrying an unmistakable hint of excitement. He seemed infected by my mood, a trace of amusement in his tone. What good things happened? I'm just happy thinking about how we'll see each other soon. I'm happy too. We chatted on the phone for 2 hours. At last, as I lay in bed, drowsily drifting off to sleep, I heard him ask. How much longer? Soon, I whispered softly. Eloan Crowley's revenge began 2 days after I exposed her for hiring someone to cover her classes. She tried to lock me in the school building, but I ran every time I saw her, and she couldn't catch up. Every day when I left the classroom, I put on my mask and pulled down my hat, carefully observing my surroundings to avoid her. She failed to catch me for several days, which only made her angrier. On the 5th day, we had an unexpected encounter in the canteen. I had just gotten my desired meal and was happily carrying my tray, looking for an empty seat. The canteen was bustling with people. My sharp eyes spotted a vacant place, and I happily walked towards it. The chatter of voices surrounded me. I was just 4 or 5 steps away. Suddenly, a sticky and scalding soup poured down from above my head, running down my cheeks and into my collar. A good amount of it splashed into my food tray as well. I stood there, frozen, still holding my tray. The soup trickled down my neck, my skin stinging from the heat. I furrowed my brow but could only stare at my contaminated food. What a waste. It was no longer edible. The canteen fell so silent you could hear a pin drop. The person standing in front of me was all too familiar. Once again, Eloan Crowley and I became the center of attention. I looked a right mess, like a drowned rat. She had utterly humiliated me, but at least my mask still preserved a bit of my dignity. The burning gazes of onlookers fell upon me, making me incredibly uncomfortable. From the corner of my eye, I spotted a familiar figure sitting ramrod straight among the crowd. I blinked, and when I looked again, I saw who was sitting across from him. Eloan Crowley's boyfriend. They were here to back her up. You bloody backstabber, trying to get me in trouble behind my back. Who do you think you are? Eloan snarled, her blood-red lips opening and closing like a venomous viper. Her spit flew everywhere, nearly landing in my eyes. She continued her tirade, spewing words too foul to repeat, worse than the stench from a blocked drain. My dignity was trampled under her feet, crushed bit by bit. And my boyfriend? He just sat there, siding with Eloan, coldly observing her assault. What a laughable scene. When Eloan finished her rant, she tried to rip off my mask, to remove my last shred of protection. I dropped my tray on the ground with a clatter and covered my face, dodging her attempt. You dare to dodge, she screamed. I'll tear your face apart today. Like a cornered animal making its last stand, I desperately protected the mask on my face. Everyone just watched coldly. I knew they were afraid of Wilfred Sherman and Eloan's boyfriend sitting there. Unable to reach my face, Eloan became furious and raised her hand to slap me. I could feel the wind from her palm as it was about to strike my face, but in the next second, someone grabbed her hand. Of course, it wasn't Wilfred Shearman. I ducked my head, waiting for the slap that never came. When I opened my eyes again, a figure in a dress was standing in front of me. She was gripping Eloan Crowley's hand tightly. In a flash, a sharp sound rang out, causing everyone around to gasp. Eloan's face was forcefully slapped to the side. Wilfred turned his head, his gaze falling on my face with the disdain one reserves for rubbish, not even bothering to linger before shifting to the person in front of me. Eloan's boyfriend tried to stand up, but Wilfred held him down. Eloan, covering her face, glared with a mix of venom and resentment, but made no further move. The person shielding me turned around, a strand of her long curly hair falling loose, her lips a deep red, her expression cold. I bit my lip and called out to her, Imogen. Imogen Sylvester. The goddess of the mathematics department. And my unlikely friend since primary school. Our university has 2 campuses, north and south. She and I are in different campuses, and I don't know why she came to mine today. She pulled me along the whole way, practically dragging me back to my dormitory. My roommate hadn't returned. She pushed me into the bathroom without saying another word. I turned on the shower. When I came out, I saw her sitting in my chair, leaning against the backrest with a furrowed brow. Her wavy curls cascaded over her shoulders, complementing her lip color beautifully, as radiant as a rose. Your boyfriend sent you a message, she said, hearing my voice and pointing to my phone on the desk. If I remember correctly, his name is Wilfred Shearman, isn't it? Her fingertips massaged her brow, her face as expressionless and cold as ever. He was there today, wasn't he? What's going on? Isn't he your boyfriend? I remained silent, lowering my gaze to stare at my toes. Not for much longer, I suddenly spoke up, raising my eyes to meet hers. Imogen's gaze was like a knife, sharp and cold, just as it always was. She looked at me quietly for a while, and I let her scrutinize me. After a long moment, she stood up and gently pinched my cheek. If you need anything, come to me. Don't bottle it up. Imogen accompanied me for dinner before leaving. I walked her to the main gate, then decided to stroll back to the dormitory instead of cycling. My mood was unusually light. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me, seemingly following at a short distance. I quickened my pace, and the sound behind me sped up as well. Who was following me? I whirled around abruptly, but there was no one there. The footsteps had vanished, and the shadows on the path had disappeared. I felt a bit uneasy. Turning back, I continued walking briskly, taking out my mobile to call my roommate. A sharp pain suddenly shot through my hand, and with a thud, my phone hit the ground. I pulled my hand back in pain, but my arms were immediately seized, one on each side, preventing me from struggling free. A sleek black stiletto stepped on my phone, grinding it deliberately. The sound of shattering glass exploded in the quiet lane. My heart cracked a little too. That phone. I had bought it with my own hard-earned money. I'd used it for 3 or 4 years. It wasn't very responsive anymore, but I kept it for its large storage. Over the years, I'd saved so many things on it. Sometimes it would freeze for ages, and the battery was shot. I'd had it repaired 2 or 3 times. But it held too many memories for me to let it go. It contained nearly 3 years of memories with Wilfred. Sometimes just looking at a bit of it could make me happy for an entire day. Half of Eloan Crowley's face still bore unhealed red swelling. Concealer and foundation barely covered part of it, making her look somewhat ridiculous. I only glanced at her before lowering my eyes, staring fixedly at the phone under her foot. All alone now, are we? No Imogen to protect you this time? Her voice was as shrill as nails on a chalkboard, piercing my eardrums. All the nasty words flooded back into my ears bit by bit. Today, I'll teach you what happens when you mess with the wrong person. Eloan waved her hand, and the 2 beside her dragged me into the woods. They dumped me on the ground. I straightened my back, looking at Eloan, who stood with her arms crossed. The moonlight was bright tonight. Through the layers of leaves, I could still make out the grotesque and twisted features of the person before me. She raised her foot, quick and vicious, trying to stomp on me. As her thin heel wobbled, I quickly rolled to the side. Eloan, furious with embarrassment, shouted, "Hold her up." The others immediately grabbed me, treating me like a sacrificial animal. Eloan's lips curled into a smile, blood-red lipstick smeared beyond the edges of her mouth. In the moonlight, she looked like a cursed doll with unevenly applied oil paint. She lifted her leg, aiming the thin, sharp heel at my abdomen, grinning maliciously as she kicked down hard. "It's going to hurt," I thought. It was nearly curfew when I returned to my dorm. The matron downstairs was holding the lock, and my clothes were stained with mud and grass, looking quite disheveled. As I entered, I quietly apologized to her. The matron was kind and simply said it was all right. When I got back to my room, my roommate was watching a series while munching on crisps. She paused it when she heard the door open. "Poppy, why are you so late, and why are your clothes dirty again?" "I fell over again," I answered softly, not removing my mask. "Are you all right?" She widened her eyes. "Why do you keep falling lately? Does anything hurt this time? Let me put some ointment on it for you." I shook my head. I slowly walked to the wardrobe to get some clothes, then went into the bathroom. As the warm water fell from above, I finally felt a sense of coming back to life. The bruises on my arms and thighs had not yet faded, showing how brutal Wilfred's men had been that day. There was still a slight pain when I pressed on them. I gave them a hard pinch, and tears of pain welled up, only to be washed away by the flowing water. All of it disappearing down the drain. As I stepped out of the bathroom, Wilfred's call came through right on cue. I tapped the answer button, and his slightly husky voice filled the air. It seemed we always had endless things to discuss. Wilfred told me about a little kitten he'd spotted by the roadside today. He'd fed it a bit of sausage. The kitten was adorable, he said. "Babe, do you prefer cats or dogs?" he asked. I paused for a moment before replying, "Dogs." "All right then, we'll get a dog in the future. Kind, gentle, attentive, and devoted. Just like the persona he'd always presented to me. So good even to stray animals." The voice on the other end of the line continued chattering, but I couldn't focus on a single word. Wilfred Shearman. What future could we possibly have? Wilfred Shearman found me faster than I had anticipated. On the third night after Eloan Crowley cornered me, I was leaving the library. Someone was following me. As I reached a less crowded area, the footsteps behind me grew closer. I pulled my hat down a bit, discreetly quickening my pace. As I reached the corner, someone grabbed my collar from behind, yanking me backwards. Losing my footing, I was pulled down onto the nearby grass. Fortunately, the soft, damp soil cushioned my fall, sparing me from much pain. Wilfred released his grip and looked down at me with disdain. His gaze upon me held no warmth, only impatience. "Eloan says you need to apologize." I sat awkwardly on the ground, staring at him blankly as if I hadn't understood his words. Wilfred's features were strikingly handsome. The first time I saw his photo, I was stunned. He looked like an angel fallen to earth. A cliché comparison, I know. But I've never met anyone more befitting of that description. Gentleness was the mask he wore for me. The Wilfred before me now was his true self. You should have just let her vent her anger. Why did you have to provoke her? Wilfred's brow furrowed, his tone laced with irritation. It was the first time I'd seen him frown or speak to me so impatiently. "I'm not the one at fault," I said, my voice unexpectedly hoarse beneath my mask. "I don't care," Wilfred suddenly interjected, cutting me off. His expression was cold. "I couldn't care less whose fault it is. You made her lose face. She's upset." All the strength drained from my body, the unspoken words dying in my throat. I stared at him intently. "She wants you to apologize in front of the whole school on Saturday night." Wilfred glanced at his phone, his frown deepening. "Just agree to it." "I'd rather not get physical with a girl." "Apologize?" I repeated his words, finding it somewhat amusing. How am I supposed to apologize? Saturday, 8 p.m., at the school field, Wilfred paused. "On your knees." Someone passed by the corner. Two people's gazes fell on me, tinged with a bit of pity. However, the moment they clearly saw Wilfred Shearman, their expressions changed, and they quickly walked away. Silence spread through the night. I lowered my eyes. Breathing sounds seemed particularly clear in the quiet night. If an apology can solve the problem, don't let it escalate into something bigger. I know, I interrupted him. Sunday night at 8, on the sports field. I'll be there. I definitely will be. The dormitory doors had already been locked. When I checked my phone again, I saw several missed calls from my roommate. I sent her a message, telling her not to worry and that I wouldn't be returning to the dorm tonight due to some business. As soon as I exited my roommate's chat, a new WhatsApp message from Wilfred popped up. Babe, why did you suddenly stop replying to me earlier? An indescribable emotion washed over me as I typed out each word. Wilfred Shearman. Let's meet. His WhatsApp call came through immediately. I answered, and Wilfred's voice was filled with barely contained joy. Baby, really? We're going to meet? I remained standing where I was. The street was now deserted. The moon had slipped behind the clouds, and the streetlights cast a dim glow. The night was silent. I could hear his breath in my ear. I smiled at the light, yes. My tone was so sickeningly sweet it almost made me nauseous. Will. I really want to see you. Imogen opened the door just as I finished my call. Her gaze focused on the stain on my trousers, silently demanding an explanation with her eyes. Just a small accident, I said calmly. Accident? She repeated quickly, her voice devoid of emotion. And what about this? She held her mobile screen in front of my face. On it was a screenshot. Sunday night, 8 p.m., sports field. Everyone come and watch the show. At the top, Aloan Crowley's name was prominently displayed. Poppy, Imogen's face was as cold as ever. Tell me, what is this? I pulled off my face mask and smiled at her. A fox borrowing the tiger's might. The morning sunlight filtered through the window panes, my body clock rousing me early. Imogen was still asleep. I slipped on my slippers and quietly left the room. On the balcony hung the jacket I'd worn yesterday, swaying gently in the breeze. Are you wearing that jacket for your date? I turned to see Imogen awake, leaning against the balcony door frame with her arms crossed, eyeing me coolly. No, I replied, taking the jacket and folding it neatly. The summer jacket was thin enough to fit into my satchel without making it bulky. It's a surprise. The morning breeze carried a lingering chill as it brushed my face. Imogen's nightgown fluttered slightly in the wind. She'd always had that same impassive expression, ever since we were children. She yawned, then turned back towards the bedroom. Give me a ring if you need anything. The time on my mobile phone changed from 9:59 to 10 o'clock. The wind chimes at the entrance of the coffee shop tinkled melodiously. I took out my mirror from my bag, checking once again that my makeup was flawless. In that moment, someone tapped on the glass window beside me. I put down the mirror and turned around, only to see a young man standing in the sunlight, a corner of his shirt fluttering in the breeze, his eyes twinkling with warmth. Wilfred Shearman's eyes crinkled with a smile. Though I couldn't hear his voice clearly, I could still read his lips, recognizing the same affectionate expression as always. I grabbed my bag and quickly walked out of the coffee shop. The morning sunlight was perfect, illuminating his handsome features, while the rumble of cars could be heard from the nearby road. As if by magic, Wilfred produced a bouquet of flowers from behind his back. But even the flowers in his arms couldn't compare to him. The moment I stood before him, it was as if the person from the pictures had truly come to life. Wilfred reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear, his gesture so intimate as if we had always been close. I could see the deep love in his eyes. I heard the undisguised joy in his voice. Finally, we meet, babe. Indeed. Finally, we meet. Wilfred Shearman. Wilfred Shearman was deeply in love with Poppy Rathbone. How deep was his love? So deep that he repeatedly begged me to meet, only to fall silent again due to my refusals. So deep that he once asked me whether I preferred a traditional white wedding dress or a modern designer gown. So deep that, despite his seafood allergy, he still smiled as he peeled prawns for me. As the street lamps flickered to life, the food stalls along the pavement buzzed with energy. I declined Wilfred's offer to take me to an expensive restaurant, instead pulling him to sit at a street food stall. Wilfred, being the posh lad he was, visibly stiffened as he sat down, clearly uncomfortable in such an environment. But the moment his eyes met mine, his expression softened. I grabbed a menu and ordered from the vendor. After I finished, Wilfred said gently, "Poppy, darling, this street food may be tasty, but it's not the healthiest. Shall we come less often in the future?" I nodded. He smiled and ruffled my hair, his gaze never leaving me for a moment. Wilfred insisted on paying for the entire day. From the start, he stood carefully by my side, intentionally brushing against my hand. Then, when I firmly grasped his hand, the tips of his ears turned pink. Finally, he held my hand tightly, our fingers intertwined, as if afraid I might run away. His heart and eyes were filled with nothing but me. Steaming hot kebabs and seafood were brought to our table. Each prawn was drenched in sauce, looking deliciously tempting. Just as I was about to reach for one, Wilfred stopped me. He picked up a prawn from the bowl and, somewhat clumsily, peeled off the shell, placing it in my dish. I was taken aback. "I'll peel them for you. You just enjoy eating," he said. I knew Wilfred was a bit of a germaphobe, and I also knew he was allergic to these things. He looked at me, his eyes brimming with tenderness. In his eyes, I saw a tiny reflection of myself. "For the rest of our lives, let me take care of you," he said softly. The night was growing deeper. Wilfred Shearman went to settle the bill with the owner. I walked outside and hailed a cab at the roadside. I had just opened the back door when Wilfred caught sight of me. He hurriedly finished paying and rushed towards me. I took out my coat from my bag and put it on. The evening wind was picking up, ruffling a strand of Wilfred's hair. The moonlight and street lamps cast their glow upon him. He ran towards me, carrying the bouquet I had left on the chair. He was only a few steps away. I suddenly spoke, "Don't come any closer." Wilfred stopped in his tracks, his expression confused. But the moment his eyes met mine, he froze. "Poppy." He called my name cautiously. The time on my phone turned to 10 o'clock sharp. It was as if Cinderella's clock had struck, and all the beautiful dreams vanished in an instant. But I wasn't Cinderella. And Wilfred wasn't a prince. 12 hours. 3 years ago, I met Wilfred. Back then, he was reclusive, world-weary, cold, and starved for affection. Every conversation was tinged with his dissatisfaction with life. I pretended not to notice, staying by his side, slowly waiting for him to open up. Now, he had grown into the image of a perfect gentleman. 3 years of phone calls, 3 years of companionship, 3 years of time flowing like water. And now, it was time to put a full stop. Wilfred always thought we had a future. But alas, there was no possibility of a future for us. The moonlight was thin and cold. I pulled the hood of my coat down and spread my arms, smiling at him. "Wilfred, does this look familiar?" I watched as his face turned deathly pale, his expression as shattered as fine porcelain. Wilfred's lips moved, but only a meaningless gasp escaped his throat. Helplessly. Fearfully. Not knowing what to say. He lifted his foot, wanting to come closer. "Don't come any closer." I stepped back, my hand on the car door. Stung by my gaze, his face paled even more, his steps hesitant, but he stopped. "Wilfred," I interrupted him, my tone flat, "see you tomorrow. 8 o'clock at the sports field. Don't stand me up." These words seemed to be the final blow. Wilfred's face turned ashen, he almost lost his balance, as if his soul had left him. He rushed towards me, trying to grab my hand, but I quickly got into the taxi. The driver started the car. As we passed by, I smiled brightly at him through the window. Imogen was waiting for me downstairs when I blocked Wilfred's 4th number on WhatsApp. She had just returned from her evening workout, her face still glistening with a thin layer of sweat. "How did it go?" she asked. "We broke up," I replied. Imogen simply hummed in response, offering no further comment. I obediently followed her into the flat. As Imogen poured me a glass of water, her hand paused for a moment. Then, as if nothing had happened, she handed me the glass. During dinner, Imogen's mobile kept ringing. She glanced at it once before silencing the call. I put down my fork, looking at her quizzically. "It's Wilfred," she said, her expression impassive. "He wants to speak with you." "No need," I replied. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, its hour hand pointing to 6. I stood up. If he has something to say, we can discuss it in person. By the time I reached the sports field, it was almost dark. There were far more people on the running track than usual. The lights beneath the main stand were dazzling, as if a stage had been specially prepared for us. I pulled my cap down a little further and walked straight towards it. Sharp-eyed passers-by recognized my clothes, giving me a few extra glances and whispering to their companions. Well, wasn't she feeling all high and mighty the other day? Now she's here to apologize to Aloan like a good girl. A voice as shrill as a crow's suddenly rang out, exposing my identity to everyone. I looked towards the speaker. It was one of the girls Aloan Crowley had brought with her that night. She stood with her arms crossed, her face full of the mockery and derision of a victor facing the defeated. Getting bolder, she reached out to push me again. I didn't dodge, but suddenly a hand appeared in front of me, blocking her and swatting her hand away. The girl winced in pain and was about to swear, but then fell silent. My gaze passed through the two of them to see Aloan Crowley emerging from the crowd. Her cheeks were still somewhat swollen, but at least they were symmetrical now. Step by step, it was only a few meters, but she walked as if it were a difficult and slow journey. The surroundings suddenly fell quiet. The main character had taken the stage, the show was finally about to begin. Aloan looked at me, but the arrogance of the past was gone. She didn't dare look at Wilfred Shearman standing in front of me, her gaze fixed on me, the malice in her eyes undiminished. She wanted to use me to prove that her status was beyond challenge. Unfortunately, her plans had fallen through. More and more people gathered around, and the whispers grew louder as we remained motionless. Growing impatient, I spoke first, Crow. Before I could finish, Wilfred, who was standing in front of me, spoke in a cool tone, Aloan Crowley. Aloan's body trembled almost imperceptibly. When she met my eyes again, the hatred in them had intensified. But still, intimidated by Wilfred's presence, she slowly and stiffly began to speak. I'm sorry. Aloan's voice wasn't quiet, successfully causing her friends behind her to gasp and shout urgently. Aloan! What are you saying? Why are you apologizing to her? She should be the one apologizing to you. This outburst silenced everyone in the area. Aloan's face grew even more unpleasant. She hissed quietly, "Shut up." I stepped around Wilfred, who was blocking me, and stood in front of her. I shouldn't have pushed you when you cut in line. I met her gaze, so, I've come to kneel and apologize to you. I emphasized the words kneel and apologize heavily. The person behind me tried to grab my hand, but I shook them off. I ignored him, just smiling at Aloan. After a long moment, the person behind me spoke, his tone as detached as that night when he told me he didn't care whose fault it was. Aloan Crowley. The implication in his tone was far too obvious. Aloan's face turned pale. Her body trembling, she pressed her lips tightly together and, bit by bit, began to bend her knees. All eyes were focused on her alone. The weight of 1,000 pounds, gradually bending her spine. In just a week, our roles had reversed, and now she was the one whose dignity was being trampled. I heard the whispers in the crowd, camera flashes capturing Aloan's disgraceful state, cold stares and mockery descending upon her. Suddenly, I felt elated. Leaning close to Aloan's ear, I chuckled softly. So, without Wilfred, you're nothing at all. The cicadas chirped noisily in the trees, leaving only their song and the sound of their breathing in the forest. The sight of the three of them huddled together was particularly comical. Aloan Crowley's expression was terrified, yet she still shouted angrily, "I won't let you get away with this." I ignored her anger, simply looking down at her with a smile. The moment my fingers gripped her chin, her body involuntarily shrank back. She was forced to meet my gaze. "Let go of me!" Aloan's unfinished words were lost in the sharp sound of a slap. Now it was symmetrical. Aloan seemed stunned by the blow, taking a while to recover. "You hit me. You actually." I stepped on her leg, "Won't let me get away with it? You just wait. Tomorrow I'll be waiting. I'll be waiting for Wilfred Shearman, my boyfriend, to come and confront me." As we walked back to the dormitory, Wilfred Shearman followed behind me in silence. Several times he seemed on the verge of speaking but ultimately remained quiet. When we reached the entrance of the dormitory building, I suddenly turned around, my gaze meeting his. His eyes were evasive at first, but upon locking with mine, they seemed to grasp at something like a lifeline. "Poppy, I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't know." "Wilfred," I interrupted him. I stretched out my arm. Under the dim yellow streetlight, the unhealed bruises were still clearly visible. "Do you see it clearly?" I asked. I met his gaze and called him softly, just as I used to, "Will. Do you see it clearly? It's been over 20 days, and it's still there." Wilfred took a step back, unsteady on his feet. His gaze fell on the bruises, and he stared at them as if in a trance, seemingly lost. People are like that. Only when their actions directly affect themselves can they truly perceive the pain they cause. Everything Wilfred had ever done to me would now become a sharp blade, cutting into his heart, making him suffer unbearably. Wilfred Sherman disappeared for 3 or 4 days before reappearing again. At lunchtime, I went to the canteen to queue for food. I arrived early, and the queue at the popular counter was half its usual length. I was in a good mood as I stood in line waiting. The number of people in front gradually decreased. A familiar figure appeared at the side of the queue. Eloane Crowley and her little friends. She spotted a position and tried to use her old tricks, but this time she wasn't as successful as before. Someone pushed her, causing her to stumble. Embarrassed and angry, she was about to start cursing, but someone beat her to it. "What are you playing at? Still trying to cut in line? Have you no shame?" People used to be afraid of her rowdy boyfriend, and even more so of Wilfred Sherman, who backed them up. Wilfred's family had money and power. So when Wilfred wasn't on her side, Eloane Crowley was nothing. I averted my gaze, no longer paying attention to her drama. I happily got my food and prepared to find a seat. It was a scene identical to that day. Just 4 or 5 steps away. As I passed a table, my hand was suddenly grabbed. The bowl wobbled, but fortunately, the food didn't spill. I looked at the culprit who had grabbed me, and it was Wilfred Sherman, who had been missing for a few days. He looked as if he hadn't slept well, with dark circles under his eyes and a weary expression. But his features were so striking that it gave him a sort of decadent beauty. "Poppy," Wilfred called my name cautiously. "I'm sorry." His expression was visibly apologetic. "For everything I've done to you, if I can't make amends, you can give it all back to me, okay?" I felt like laughing. How would I give it back? The hand gripping my wrist suddenly applied force, causing my bowl to tilt. The dark gravy and food, following the tilt of the bowl, all fell onto Wilfred. Food stuck to his hair, dark sauce trickled down his face, creating a stark contrast with his pale skin. It also fell onto his white t-shirt, staining a large area. Before, he said I had embarrassed Eloane, and she wasn't happy. Later, he embarrassed Eloane, trampling her into the dust. Now, he personally embarrassed himself. He wanted to ask for my forgiveness. But Wilfred, things in this world aren't settled just by paying back in kind. Wilfred was waiting for my answer. He was destined to be disappointed. "Wilfred," I said. The bowl in my hand was now empty. I looked down at it and said softly. That was the dish I'd been wanting to eat for ages. He froze for a moment, his face slowly crumbling. "I'm sorry, Poppy," Wilfred said. "I didn't know it was you." "You didn't know it was me?" I interrupted him. Wilfred had apologized many times. He was afraid of losing me. "Wilfred," I said, "you've never realized what you did wrong." He apologized to me because I was Poppy Rathbone. I was the person he cherished most. If I were nobody to him, would he still think he had done something wrong? No, he wouldn't. When he was labeled as a bully, from the first time we met, I knew there was no chance for us anymore. "Wilfred, do you know?" I continued, "I was so close to falling for you. But unfortunately." I paused, then said firmly, "Bullies never deserve love." Wilfred's face turned pale instantly, his body swaying as if he might collapse at any moment. Wilfred Sherman had tried to reach out to me before. The most intense incident was on a rainy night. He was drunk, and no one could stop him from calling me. The voice on the other end of the line was hoarse, even carrying a hint of tears. He called my name over and over again. Please, Poppy, don't leave me. As he kept repeating, his voice faded away. In the background, someone was trying to persuade him to drink less. Someone grabbed his phone, their tone slightly angry. Sis, I'm begging you, please say something nice to Wilf. If he keeps drinking like this, he'll die. I remained silent for a moment. Put him back on the phone. Wilfred's voice was a mess. Poppy, please, don't abandon me. I was wrong, I know I was wrong. I looked out the window, my voice flat. Wilfred. Don't be pathetic. Later, Imogen told me that he stood outside my flat all night. It rained in the middle of the night, and by early morning, someone had to take him to the hospital. I listened to it as if it were a joke, forgetting it as soon as I heard it. I had long known that Wilfred was arrogant, proud, exquisitely polished on the outside but hollow within. None of that mattered. I had once hoped he could be my salvation. But he wasn't. He wasn't the moon. The misfortune of his dysfunctional family was no excuse for becoming an accomplice to bullying. Some things are simply unforgivable.